Okay, today we are going to take a look at how we can launch a Mac OS instance in AWS and access it with VNC. So we get the full desktop experience within Mac OS in a cloud provider. Let's take a look. So you can see here, I'm logged into my AWS account. So in order to get a Mac OS instance set up, what we need to do first is reserve Mac hardware. So you'll need a dedicated host for this. And to do that, we're going to go to the services at the top. We'll select compute and EC2. So we'll go ahead and we'll select EC2. Once the page loads, on the left-hand side, we can expand instances if it's not expanded and select dedicated hosts, or we can go here and select dedicated hosts on the center portion. So we will need a dedicated host. You can see here that I already have 2 dedicated hosts. One has a Mac instance currently running and the other one is pending. So let's go ahead and reserve a new dedicated host. So we can select the option allocate dedicated host. You'll fill in the information here. So in here we will say Mac host. Instance family, we're going to choose Mac 1. That is the only option available for Mac dedicated host instances. Instance type, the only option available is going to be mac1.metal. Select your availability zone. You can choose to instance auto placement. I like to do this if you're just going to have one Mac instance and one dedicated Mac host. It will automatically place the instance when you deploy it onto the host that's available. And then we hit allocate. Since I already have a host allocated that's available, I won't be doing this. You are required to hold this dedicated host for at least 24 hours. So if this is something that you want to do for a build project or something that you only need it for 3 or 4 hours, just be forewarned that you will be reserving this for at least 24 hours. You will not be able to delete or remove or deallocate this host for 24 hours. Once we've reserved our dedicated host, we will go back to our dedicated hosts panel and we can see the host here that we have. To get a Mac OS instance or a VM or an operating system onto this Mac dedicated host hardware, what we'll do is we can either check the box here and go to actions and select launch instances onto host, or we can select the host ID and we can see the details about this host. So its allocation time, its settings, any instances that are running on that host, the capacity, your tags and all that kind of stuff. So the one particular thing about Mac hosts is that you can only have one instance running on them and it consumes all cores and all memory. So you can't deploy more than one instance on one host. So what we'll do is we will go to actions, we'll select launch instances onto host, and we'll be brought to the AWS AMI selection page. So in this page, there is a lot of things that you could select here, but we are most interested in the Mac OS options. So we have Mac OS Monterey, Mac OS Big Sur, and Mac OS Catalina. So we're going to go with the latest version of Mac OS Monterey. We'll select that. And here we only have one option, that is Mac 1. Configure the instance details. And then in here, you'll be able to select your networking, subnetting, if you have anything particular with a business or with your specific account, and which region you want to deploy your subnet in. So we'll select US East 1A. And for the most part, the rest of this is going to be defaults. There are a lot of options in this that will be selectable, but won't be available for the specific Mac OS or the Mac dedicated hosts. So we can see here in this selection here, the host that it's going to deploy to is highlighted. If you have more than one dedicated host and you want to deploy it specifically to that host, maybe it's in a different region or something like that, you can select the allocate a new host. So it'll automatically select the host here since we chose the option to do that. So once everything here is selected, all of your options, just go over those. We can select storage. Here you can change your storage option. I find 100 gigabytes is perfectly fine for what I tend to do. And you can select the volume type here. The defaults are going to be fine for what we want to do. We can do tags. I don't need any tags. This is just to make it a little more searchable and have tag options. The next important thing is a security group. So the default security group is blank. In order to access the Mac instance, we need to allow some network traffic through. So for us, we are just going to allow port 22. That is going to be SSH. The source is going to be from anywhere. You could select your IP address. It'll automatically fill it in as you see here. And that will allow only your specific IP address to access this. Now, if you get a new IP address, obviously you'll have to log into this AWS interface and modify your security group for this machine. So I will leave it as anywhere because we are going to be accessing this machine from different sources around the world, and we have multiple people accessing this. And then we will do review and launch. So this is all the information. It looks great. And we'll say launch. So you should get this screen here to create a new key pair if you don't already have one. If you do have one already, which I do, but the default for this is going to be create a new key pair. You're going to name the key pair. So I'll name this one macOS Monterey, and then you select download it. Be sure that you actually download this file and you get the full file. Okay, so there's our .pem file. And once we are sure that we have this, we can select launch instance. You will need this .pem file to access the machine. And then you'll get a page like this. Your instance is now launching, and you can create billing alerts and so on and so forth. And then down here, we can select view instances on host. We'll select that. We'll select our host. We'll scroll to the bottom and we can see that we have running instances. Okay, so the instance is running. So we'll select that. And we can see our instance, our IP address, and all of our information regarding this instance. So we'll select the instance, and the only thing left that we need here is our public IP address. So we'll copy that. Now what we can do from here is connect to it so that we are able to configure the rest of the machine to be able to use VNC to get a desktop connection for this. Now you'll notice that up here there is a connect button. None of this stuff works. You can't EC2 serial console. You can SSH, gives you basic instructions on how to SSH. You can actually just follow these. You're not able to do session manager, and you're not able to do instance connect, all because it's a Mac instance. So we can just follow the instructions here. We can use Putty or we can use Windows. So in Windows, we can come here. So we can see our .pem file is here. We will need this. So let's go ahead and cut this file, and we will drop it into our user admin folder. Okay, so here's our users admin folder. We'll paste that into there, and there it is. So let's run the command here. So because we are on Windows, we shouldn't need to do this here. But we can essentially copy this here, this example, as the example is formed specifically for our instance. And we should be able to just paste this into here and hit enter. Okay, so I didn't wait long enough the first time and I got a connection timed out. I gave it a couple minutes And when we run this command now, we should get a fingerprint to continue. We say yes, we'd like to take that fingerprint, and we are connected. We can see our Mac OS via SSH. Now, in order to be able to get a remote desktop for this machine, we need to enable the remote desktop options. Now, obviously we can't do that in the GUI because we don't have remote desktop available. We don't have the desktop available for us to connect to. So we need to do those through command line. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first option we're going to enable is going to be screen sharing. So the command for that is sudo defaults write, and we're going to write to var db launchd.db com.apple.launchd/overrides.plist com.apple.screensharing. Disable, and it's going to be true or false, and we're going to set it to false. Okay, so this is the first command here. You just go ahead and hit enter. And then we want to also set the screen sharing to be set when we restart the machine, so on launch. So the command to do that is sudo launchctl load, and then it's going to be system/library, and we can tab this out, and it's going to be LaunchDaemons, and then com, and it's going to be apple and screen, and then we can share that, and then we can tab that out. So screensharing.plist, hit enter. Oh wait, looks like we spelt launch, so we want launch. Okay, perfect. And then the last step is to set a password for our user. So the default user here is the EC2-user. That's the user that is built in with AWS. So let's change our password. So it's going to be dscl. Then we're going to put a dot. We'll do passwd users, and then your username, which is ec2-user. And when we hit enter, it's going to prompt us to enter a password. And it will only prompt you once, so make sure that you enter the correct password that you want. So we'll do that. It'll take a second. Perfect. Now what we can do is use our SSH session to port forward the VNC port, which is port 5900, into this EC2 instance. So let's kill this SSH session. Okay, so we've exited, clear the screen, and we can go back to our SSH command that we first started. And all we're going to do now is specify port forwarding. So that's going to be a capital L. We're going to forward port 5900 on localhost to port 5900 of our Mac OS instance. When we hit enter, we should get an SSH into there, and it should just look normal, but we should be able to use a VNC client on localhost to connect to our Mac OS. Let's check it out. Okay, we can see here we got our regular SSH prompt, and if we launch our VNC viewer, let's open that up, and we can just VNC directly to localhost. Okay, we'll get a pop-up saying it's not secure, but it is, because this is a tunnel established over SSH, which is secure. So I'll click OK, and we'll enter our username and password. Click OK, and we will get connected. Enter our password once again. And there we have it. We are connected over an SSH tunnel on port 5900 to our Mac OS. Now we should keep this SSH client open, because if we close this, we will lose our connection over our SSH tunnel. If we destroy the SSH tunnel by closing this window, we will effectively destroy the VNC tunnel that we're using to connect to the desktop. Let's show that. So we'll close this, and instantly we get that. If we reopen our command prompt and do that command again, so if we reestablish the connection, we should reestablish our VNC session. Now, if we want to not have to do this and we want to go over a little bit more insecure method, we can do that without having to establish the SSH connection. There are some things that we would have to do first though. So the first thing that we would have to do is use our IP address. So we'll see if we use this IP address just here and we hit enter, we will forever just be sitting here connecting to EC2. However, if we go into our instance management console for EC2, navigate to security, we can see here that we've only allowed port 22. We can go to our security group here, go to inbound rules, then edit inbound rules. We'll add a rule and we'll select port 5900 from any destination. That's going to be our VNC connection, and we can save. Now that we've saved it, we can retry connecting. And when we retry connecting, we are prompted to enter our username and password, and we'll get connected. So it's not a very secure method. I would not suggest it. I would suggest using the SSH tunnel. It is far more secure. You can also use Putty. We can take a look at that real quick. So in order to do this over Putty, we will set our host name to that address. We'll go down to the connection area. We'll select data, auto login, fill in the EC2 user. Then we'll go to SSH. We'll select auth, and at the browse button, we will go to our downloads, and we'll notice here we don't have a PPK. Now the thing about Putty is it only likes PPK files. So what we'll need to do is create a PPK. So if you have Putty installed, you should be able to go puttygen. Okay, so use the application called puttygen, which installs with it. Load an existing file. We'll go to our file. Find our macOS Monterey.pem file. Select open. Select OK. And then we'll save private key. Select save private key without a password. That's fine for me. And we'll just save it in the same spot. We'll actually name it the same thing. And we'll just put .ppk at the end. Save. And now we have a Mac OS Monterey.ppk file. Select OK. So that's for the auth. And then for tunnel, we can add source port here is 5900. This is going to be the AWS instances IP, and then we'll put a colon 5900. We're forwarding port 5900 to the Mac OS, and we'll select add. Okay, I would suggest this is a little bit more configuration than normal, so I would suggest saving it. Mac AWS, and then save. And then we can open this. So once this is opened, we'll get a security alert. We'll say yes. And there's our macOS SSH session. And now we should be able to close that VNC session and reopen one to localhost again. And there it is. It works perfectly fine, just like with the Windows session. And there it is. So Putty will do the same thing, except you get the benefits of using a Putty SSH if you're going to use that. You can save that session. The Windows one, it's pretty simple. It's a copy and paste of a command line. If you've saved that command line, the Putty one, just as easy, especially if you've saved that session. You just double click on it and it will load it. So I hope this has helped you out getting your Mac OS in AWS available for a remote desktop. It's very useful and a pretty cool feature that AWS has. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.